Okay, we're going to start moving into rear body lock position. And this is another mainstay situation that is going to occur while you're pursuing your training partner's back, okay? I mean, you could argue you already have your training partner's back to some degree. All right, my training partner's up on his feet, okay? So while this does start involving a lot of standing position, you're going to end up here at various times when you're doing jiu-jitsu. It's inevitable, okay? As much as some of you guys want to butt scooch your way through the sport. All right, at some point, especially if you're competing in something like an ADCC rules tournament, you'll end up in this situation quite often, okay? And there's a number of different transitions in the upper body, takedowns, etc., where you just end up behind your training partner in this position, and then you'll be expected to follow a series of events to eventually, hopefully, take your training partners back, etc. And we've seen a lot of how we go about doing that once we get to a 4-point position, etc. So I'm going to focus mainly on situations that get my training partner into a position that would help us better take the back, okay? So my training partner starts in an upright situation, okay? We have control over our training partner's waist. Now, the first move we're going to look at is called Ashiatoshi. It's very similar to some other movements that we've worked on in the turtle situation in terms of trying to take our training partners back, okay? It's very similar to the tilts that we do, but as I get a hold of my training partner's hips, what I'm going to look to do is start walking around the corner and placing a foot barring across my training partner's 2 legs like so, okay? Once I do this, it immobilizes both of my training partner's legs in such a way that it makes it hard for him to continue to walk forward without stumbling and falling, okay? So often the first thing that's going to happen here is as you start to go towards the mat, he'll probably outstretch his hands and he'll end up initially in like a 4-point position. So we could have done this from 4-point. Technically, you can still do this move from 4-point, but it often starts from rear body lock. Okay, so we get into this position. We bar a leg across my training partner's 2 legs. Again, being very careful not to sit hips into our training partner's knee and compromise their knee, really hurt training partners, okay? This is one where you have to pay close attention to where the direction of force. The direction of force cannot be into the knee. It's got to be out in this direction. Your butt's going to land away from your training partner. I'll put my ear over my training partner's back to make things a little bit more secure. And I'll hop like so out to the corner. I can stop right here. And this would be best case scenario for me, where I can get a seatbelt grip and begin to take my training partner's back. There will be times when you hit this move and your training partner goes to try to hop across to the other side. It's not the end of the world. Okay, but my recommendation is when they do this, okay, to try to kind of come up on top of your training partner as they make that transition, as opposed to laying on your back. What do I mean by this? If my training partner goes to hop to the other side while this happens and I stay laying on my back, we get into a pretty losing situation here. It's not impossible to recover from. We're going to talk about that later in the DVD, how we can kind of recover positions like this, okay? But as of right now, if my training partner with this body lock just keeps scooting away from me, trying to cut his elbow to the inside, he'll eventually get out and on top, okay? So instead, one of the things we'll look to do, we might talk about this a little bit later as well, is as he goes to hop to that side, I'd go with him and I come up. And because I'm above my training partner now, it tends to make it easier to get things like claw grips, seat belts, etc., and then pull my training partner back into a position where I can take his back. Okay, so let's talk about this again a little bit at length. We're starting in a standing position, and I have my rear body lock on my training partner. I step around the corner, start bringing my foot in front of my training partner's legs like so, okay? And I start bringing his hands towards the mat. My hips come out in this direction, and I drive off the mat with this leg moving out in this direction. You can also push off your training partner's foot potentially, okay? But I typically like to stay somewhat behind, as I feel as though that knee against the hamstring helps bring my training partner out in this direction, and it keeps me with a hook in, okay? So I start pushing in this direction, okay? If we can keep everything here, once we land, we'll back heel strong, so we have a nice connection to our training partner. So you can see that. Back heel strong, nice connection to our training partner. Probably pull this out and start looking for a seat belt or our training partner like so, okay? If, as we land, my training partner uses the momentum to hop across, try to avoid try to avoid it altogether at first. You can do this, go to try to hop across, so just raise your knee against your training partner's hip. That usually makes it difficult. Okay, but assuming he beats my knee, hopping across, go with him to the best of your ability. This leg, instead of back heeling strong, will extend. Okay, so I'm back heeling, I'm keeping everything tight. I notice he goes to hop over me. I extend. All right, and I start getting on top. Now from here, even if I kept the body lock, try and get your back to the mat, it's easier to dig my hips back underneath and take this guy's back than if I let his hips touch the floor and try to fight from here. So once again, he starts popping up and over. I extend, go with my training partner. You can keep the body lock if you want or transfer to claw, seatbelt, knee behind, and we'll look to go take the back, okay? Again, you're basically extending your leg across your training partner's legs and falling out and away towards the corner of your training partner instead of jumping on their knee. Please don't jump on your training partner's knees. I don't want you or your training partners getting hurt. Okay, so we're going to have certain goals and objectives in various positions that we're in when we're looking to take our training partners back. Obviously, the main goal is, get behind the guy and with hooks in or a figure four body lock, and you're eventually in a place where you can strangle, right? But between point A, which is you standing facing your training partner, and point B, or depending on how many steps you took to get there, whatever letter down the line there's a lot of intermediaries. So it's not really point A to point B. It's really, point A to point Z. And then you're hitting each letter in between. And one of the letters that you're hitting in between is going to be your ability to get somebody's hands to the mat. Now, particularly we're focusing, because we're talking about rear body lock, on getting the hands to the mat from rear body lock. But getting hands to the mat from other positions is also relevant to taking the back, and we'll discuss that later. But for the time being, we're focused on the idea of being behind my training partner and doing some sort of action that gets his hands down to the mat and basically returning us back to that familiar place that we talked about before, where you can start using a lot of your back taking maneuvers, which is the 4-point position. Okay, so we get to put our training partner in one of the spots we know we can take our training partners back. Directly taking somebody's back while you're just in rear body lock is pretty goddamn risky. Every once in a while, you see somebody just jump up and throw hooks in. It's really not something that I advocate for all that much, okay? Maybe you can make the argument that, like, right off of an arm drag, actually, Chris did this in one of his tournaments. It's pretty amazing. Right off of an arm drag, he, jumped onto the guy's back, and I can kind of see an argument there. But, when you're directly behind somebody, usually there's some sort of series of movements that puts hands to the floor first, and then we start start placing hooks in and stuff. And you'll see, a compromise. The guys maybe gets one hand to the floor and then he gets back up, right? And as he's getting back up, maybe you place a hook in. I believe in that, The idea of just kind of jumping on the guy from that position is a little difficult, right? He can't bear as much of your body weight, and it's way easier for him to have free hands to swat your feet away. So we're going to try our absolute best to get his hands to the floor. Some easy ways to do it. Let's just wedge a knee in front of my training partners, restricts the motion of my training partner's feet, puts his hands to the mat. Just like that Ashiatoshi movement that we did earlier, if you wanted to, you could use Ashiatoshi just to put somebody's hands on the floor. If you wanted to just use this extended leg to put somebody's hands to the mat, you could also do that. It's like a reinforced version of knee to knee. Okay, knee to knee, I drive my training partner forward, and this leg can't follow. Okay, Ashiatoshi is just like a more advanced version of that. And then you could put this foot on the floor. Okay, augmentation to that would include stepping on your training partner's foot. So now they really can't take a step. So I pinch the knees, I step on the foot, I bring my training partner down. Okay, and we can transfer to any of the other tactics that we like to use. Stepping on my training partner's foot, that spiral ride action, dropping my training partner to the floor, etc. Okay, but as of right now, we're just stopping at putting this guy's hands to the floor. All right, so again, knee block, augment with the foot on top of your training partner's foot, or kind of a reinforced version of it where you wedge both legs, that Ashiatoshi, all of those things will get hands to the mat, and then you can return to figure four situation where you can do good work to start taking the back, okay? Other potential options to get my training partner's hands down to the mat. One that's a little unique in that most of the ways which I bring my training partner's hands to the mat, I'm kind of moving in a forward direction. is a crowbar of my training partner's hip. Sometimes what I'll do is I slide my hands into a position where my elbow glues into my training partner's hip like so. And what I'm going to do is walk backwards around my training partner, and this often puts my training partner's hands to the floor. If he doesn't put the hands to the floor, he would actually fall backwards. Okay, but usually people catch their balance here. Is it possible, especially if I sweep the foot at the same time, that my training partner falls to a knee or a hip? Yes. Okay, no doubt. Okay, but it's very often the case, okay, that I miss the foot, or even if I make contact, he catches his balance pretty quickly, comes into this position. So most of our off balances are in a forward direction. The foot, stepping on the foot and leaning, ashiatoshi, all that stuff, I'm leaning forward. All right, this one is unique. But come back up. I'm not trying to build my foot. And that the elbow pulls backwards to get my training partner's hands to the floor. So I really like that one. It's a little unique, all right, in that sense. All right, one or two more actions that we could use to start bringing my training partner's hands to the floor is using my feet to help me get hands to the floor. So I can harass my training partner's feet with koichi. So as I'm behind my training partner, I'm going to take some of the weight off of my training partner's leg. If the weight's on my training partner's leg and I sweep it, it usually gets stuck to the floor. So I'm going to push in towards my training partner, almost at a diagonal across his shoulder. As I do that, the foot becomes light and the hands come to the floor. So let's look at that again. I'll do it on the other side. If I put all the weight down on this foot, it's hard to sweep. If you're much stronger or bigger than your training partner, you might be fine. Okay, but in a world where you're working with somebody roughly your size, put your body weight towards this corner. It makes this foot light. Now all of a sudden, he can't maintain his base anymore. Okay, because I sweep out that foot. One last time. Lean towards the far corner, foot sweep, and the hands come to the mat. And again, we're ready to do all our work from here to start taking my training partners back. Another good way to harass the feet is to step my foot through and around my training partner's leg. Again, be careful of sitting on your training partner's knee. In this situation, as I step, my hips come low and my knee bumps right behind my training partner's knee. And I put my training partner's knee down to the floor like so. Once the knee's down to the floor here, I can start capitalizing, trying to take the back. Okay, so once again, we're in this position. And instead of harassing the feet with koichi, okay, I come in and I step around my training partner's ankle and I separate hands from this position. I don't like to continue to hug my training partner's waist because I want to be balanced on the mat. Okay, once I get out of this situation, I'll quickly resume taking my training partners back. Okay, but I'm one step closer to getting what I want. So to review those options, knee blocking, back up. Okay, reinforce with ashiatoshi or a step on the toes. Come back up. Okay, a crowbar at the elbow. So circle my training partner's hands to the mat. Harassing the feet with koichi. I'll push on a diagonal. Okay, come back up. Coming down, trapping low on my training partner's ankle and bumping with the knee. Not jumping onto my training partner's LCL. Okay, and then the last one, so it's a little bit riskier because you kind of lose your tight waist on your training partner, but it's still effective, especially against somebody you're having a tough time putting their hands to the mat. I'm going to shift and slide my shoulder lower than my training partner's butt like so. From here, I just drive my training partner forward onto his hands. Okay, you can either slide back up and work to take the back, or of course, you now have options to attack your training partner's legs from this position as well. Okay, so that last one, okay, a little bit less conventional, okay, a little bit riskier, but if I have a tough guy and I really want to be able to drive him forward, I slide my shoulder down, separating hands, and I just hug the quads as I drive my training partner forward. You can also slide this hand down to the ankle right away. You don't have to stay on the quads the whole time. I could go straight to here. All right, but I tend to prefer pop up. I tend to prefer this first, hands to the mat. Then as that ankle becomes light, I get a hold of the ankle like so. If I want to work into the legs, if I want to work to the body, I just keep pressure, try to pop up. I just keep pressure of my shoulder and then allow that shoulder to rise. I'm ready to capitalize in whatever way that we've already learned how to do so from 4 point. Okay, now for rear body lock, we looked at the strategy of putting your training partner's hands to the mat. Let's look at a slightly different strategy, which involves bringing your training partner's hip or knee to the mat. Okay, it could mean bringing your training partner down to turtle situation, which is typically like bringing their knees to the mat. Could mean kind of sitting them down towards their butt. All right, but it's a different kind of protocol and procedure associated with these types of techniques than just trying to get the hands down. Okay, we want to try to think of, a step-by-step process of taking our training partners back. And when you're in rear body lock, one of those steps could potentially be put hands to the mat and then begin they put them in 4-point, you get them in position where you can start taking their back. Another way of going about doing it is get them down to their knees or their hip and then go about taking the back, because that's another vulnerable position potentially for your training partner to be in. Okay, so I'll be behind my training partner. Okay. And we're going to perform reverse Tayatoshi. So normal Tayatoshi, just so we're aware, we have context for what a regular Tayatoshi is. I step across my training partner and bring my training partner's shoulders through into the mat. Okay, reverse Tayatoshi is done in the opposite direction. Instead of throwing my training partner forward, I throw him backwards. So we get in situations where we're in rear body lock and I step across my training partner, my other knee goes down to the mat, and I can bring my training partner down to the floor like so. Okay? He could come back up to turtle, okay, and then we can take his back from there. Or sometimes you might have an opportunity to just grab your seatbelt and sit behind your training partner right away, okay? But either way, by knocking them down to a hip or a knee, while you're still behind them, you still have a pretty good shot at getting your training partners back. Now, some extra details with that reverse Tayatoshi. So the traditional version is just a step and a drop, okay? One of the things we got to be really careful of here, okay, and I just did it there, okay, is to drop into this position with a fully extended leg, right, in a way where your training partner can start taking a seat onto your extended leg, okay? This is never a good thing. I want the knee turned in such a way where I can start having some flexibility here as my training partner falls, okay? This way I don't just have somebody's legs and hips just sit directly on top of my knee, okay? So don't dig your heel into the mat there, okay? As I do this move, my knee starts to point down towards the floor, okay, as opposed to pointing towards the ceiling, okay? Another thing we're going to want to think about, we might want to add a little bit of momentum into this move, okay? Part of that momentum might be my training partner pushing into me as he goes to try to kind of walk away. I'm sorry, that's when I say pushing in, I mean like pushing in with his back, maybe try to walk away, etc. That might be one way. I can get some pressure kind of in that direction. Okay, but another way would you create this momentum that I'm talking about is to start moving around my training partner in a circular pattern, okay? If I were to just push my training partner forward, it doesn't help me. If I were to just pull my training partner back, it doesn't really help me. Because when I pull back, he'll probably resist forward. Instead, I walk a circle around my training partner, and as I do this, I drop into the move. So what you're going to see is me walking like a bladed stance. So as opposed to circling like this around my training partner, what you'll see is my hip step in a natural walking pattern, like so. So as I hold my training partner's waist, natural walking pattern, natural walking pattern. Now all of a sudden I change direction and sit my training partner down to the mat. Okay, and once again, hips or knees touch the floor, and then we have that opportunity to start taking our training partners back. Okay, so good to see it. I want to generate some momentum for the Tayatoshi because maybe I went to hit it the first time, all right, and he strongly resisted by leaning forward. I had a tough time bringing this guy down. Okay, circle, 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 boom. Now I can start setting this guy down to the mat fairly easily, at which point, again, we started looking to try to expose our training partners back. Okay, so keeping in mind, we can wait for our training partners push back. That's one good way to hit this move. Okay, making sure that we keep our knees somewhat flexible and somewhat pointed towards the floor. Instead of pointing out to the ceiling like this, we'll bring our training partner down for safety purposes. Now we're going to look at one of the most popular ways to break my training partner down in wrestling. It's probably still very popular in jiu-jitsu, but for sure the most common way, maybe in the sport of wrestling, to start breaking my training partner further down to the mat. And it's called the mat return, okay? Pretty obvious, okay? My training partner is going to get in the standing position. And what I'm going to look to do is initially elevate my training partner off of the mat, hence the mat return. I take him off of the mat first and return him back down to the mat. When I return him back down to the mat, what's important is that I return him in such a way that it's difficult for my training partner to just land on his feet, okay? If I were to lift my training partner up off the mat and he were to just place his feet back down, it's not a true mat return. So if I lift and elevate my training partner and his feet end up back on the floor, nothing really happened, okay? Nothing helpful happened anyway in terms of trying to take my training partners back. So what I have to try to do is I have to try to make it so that it's very difficult for him to place his feet back where he originally put them. Let's talk about how I could potentially do this, okay? Part of it is done with my arms to try to turn my training partner in a side-on position as I lift. So you're going to see my elbows kind of swing out to the side. So as I lift and come catty-corner to my training partner's hips, okay, what you'll see is my elbow, my outside elbow elevating and my near elbow lowering. And when I do this, it moves my training partner's legs so that he's somewhat parallel to the mat and makes it harder for him to step down. So he's likely to land on his knees and elbows or even his hip. Like so. Okay? Let's look at this again. I step catty-corner to his hips. We can do this on either side. And then we look to adjust our elbow position so that the hips, all right, are moved out and away, and my training partner can't just land on his feet again, okay? Now, what are some ways we can make this even better? I talked about use of my hands, okay? Another thing I can do is use my knees, okay? My hands are kind of busy holding my training partner's hips, but my legs just have to lift my training partner off the floor. Once I reach the peak of the lift, I can use at least one leg to manipulate my training partner. So as I peak and my training partner's feet come off the floor, you're going to see this knee wiping underneath my training partner's legs, again, trying to get him parallel to the mat. And by doing so, I have a greater degree of success at getting his hands, knees, or potentially even his hip down to the floor, okay? Once you've done that, we go follow our procedures from turtle position to start beginning to take your training partners back, okay? So once again, in our rear body lock situation, we'd love to just mat return our training partner, okay? When we mat return our training partner, do everything you can to try to get them as flat to the mat surface as possible, whether that's using your knees or your elbows, some combination of the two. Okay, and bring your training partner towards the floor. Another way you can technically do this, it's a bit more risky to do this to your training partner from their perspective, okay, is from 2-on-1 situations. Whether you get the 2-on-1 or you're locked around your training partner's arm, now when you mat return your training partner, he'll have no base on this side. When you're drilling this with somebody, be respectful of that fact. Your training partners that you work with on a day-to-day basis, you're not going to want to hurt. In live competition, maybe you can get away with a little bit more, but even in live competition, you got to be somewhat careful. You spike somebody onto their neck, that's going to be illegal in most mainstream competitions, even at mixed martial arts, okay, in many contexts. So if you're going to do mat returns from here, try to avoid going past parallel to the mat, to the point where your training partner's head and shoulder are aimed towards the floor, okay? We would do our mat return, we give a little lift, and then we're just right there, ready to bring our training partner down to the floor. You could see the potential problem associated. Come back up. If I were able to turn my training partner's head up too far, he now no longer has a hand to post. So his head would head straight towards the floor, all right, causing potential damage. So you got to be very careful with that if you work from a 2-on-1. It does enhance the move. You just got to be a lot more careful, be a lot harder for your training partner, to base himself in these sorts of situations. Okay, so this is another great procedure to break your training partner down further and get ready to get on your training partner's back. Is any variation that you guys can think of to mat return your training partner, elevation, and then back down to the mat. All right, now we're going to look at a little bit of a dynamic situation from rear body lock, okay? So most of the situations that we've looked at thus far are pretty static. or if my training partner's fairly stationary and we just perform moves. Maybe with the reverse Tai Toshi, we worked a little bit more dynamically, but for the most part, everything's just kind of my training partner's in this position, you perform the move. As we know, jiu-jitsu exists in a situation where two athletes are moving all the time for the most part, with the exception of pins. So it's unlikely, that we can work every single thing in a static position when we're drilling. Some things have to be done with movement. All right. When I get behind my training partner, I'm holding rear body lock. One of the directions of movement is almost always away from me. Okay. Reason being, what my training partner would love to do, you can just get rear body lock on me real quick. What my training partner would love to do, even if he's not particularly sophisticated, like even if he doesn't really know what he's doing, he'll try to like walk away from me and separate hands. It is a valid technique. Okay. But even people that don't know what they're doing, like, they get the idea, like they don't want to be controlled at the waist. So they're going to do everything that they can to try to break apart the hands and eventually face, the opponent. So as my training partner is moving away from me, okay, one of the things I can do is start tripping my training partner's feet in particular ways that make my training partner lose his balance when weight comes off of his foot. All right, there are different foot sweeps that are done at different times. For example, when you perform a sase, you typically do it on a foot that has the weight loaded onto it. In this instance, we're performing a dayashi, and most dayashis that I'm aware of, the idea is to catch an unweighted foot. And when you catch that unweighted foot, you're able to move it across your training partner's body, and eventually, sometimes it even runs into the secondary leg, knocks your training partner over, but it moves across the body enough that your training partner ends up heading towards the floor. So just a rough look at what we're doing here. We got a guy moving away from us, and as a foot comes off the mat, we clip into it and knock our training partner down to a knee or to a hip. Really depends on how good you do this move. Now, one of the interesting things about this move is there's a few different ways to go about doing it, depending on what you're comfortable with, okay, and conditions, that your training partner is trying to move away. My favorite time to do this move is when I've actually almost lost control over my training partner. Like when I get into situations, if I can still hug this guy's hips and he starts trying to move away from me, etc., I can still do a lot of other moves, okay? But if I'm about to lose him, okay, I'm probably going to go to hit my dayashi as this guy goes to move away. The hardest one to hit, in my opinion, is the one where you touch foot on foot or foot against your training partner's ankle and try to knock him down. Let's head the other direction so they can actually physically see the foot sweep. I think this is the hardest one to hit. This one here, even just doing it slow, drilling for you guys, I missed. It's okay to miss. Like you can have your leg run into your training partner's leg, and it's not the end of the world. But the best case scenario would be me catching my training partner's foot with my foot and brushing it across. Okay. If you miss, not to worry. Like I said, as long as the timing is right, you'll still brush the foot across. So even if it's kind of tibia to fibula here, you're good to go. Okay, and you'll brush that foot across. There's no need when you're doing this move to like wind up and low kick your training partner. It's not necessary. In fact, I would argue that that's to your detriment because the timing is going to be way off. I'd rather be like relatively close to my training partner. I can feel the way that he's moving more when I'm kind of closer to my training partner rather than like winding up and trying to kick my training partner's legs. Okay. As my training partner steps, one of the best ways to drill this is through stepping patterns initially. Okay. So instead of just trying to use randomized timing, you tell your training partner, we're going to step like this. 1, 2, 3, right? And you follow your training partner's steps. Okay. This time instead of saying 1, 2, 3, I'll call out left and right. It's probably better. Left, right, left, right. Okay. And you'll see as your training partner raises that right leg, is my time to sweep. Okay? And that's a good way to develop timing. Later on, you won't have that luxury when you're doing this during live training. So you'll just start moving with your training partner and you'll kick the feet. One of the ways that I solve the problem of the timing issue that we're having here is I change the position of which I try to attack my training partner's legs. Instead of making contact at the foot, which is the end of the lever, you get good action there. I actually like knee sweep my training partner instead. So I'll position my foot in a place where it could catch my training partner's ankle, but my main focus is pushing on the thigh. The thigh is moving way slower than my training partner's foot. And the thigh can help lift my training partner off the ground. The foot can't really lift my training partner off the ground, but the thigh, you can see how I can get my training partner to jump even when he's standing still. Okay? So when I do this without having to worry so much about the timing, right? Even if my training partner stutter steps, does whatever he wants, all I do is take a big step between my training partner's legs and then follow up with a knee. And then I bring my training partner down to the mat like so. Okay? So you can try to do this with your feet. You can try to do it with your knee. But either way, we're catching an unweighted leg and bringing it across my training partner's legs. Okay? This can also be done even with separated hands. But if it's done with separated hands, try to catch your training partner's hips. So let's say your training partner fights to separate. All right, but you can still get a hip grip here, even just one hip grip. Okay, he's moving away. Even just one hip grip. If I catch this at the right time, you can still stumble your training partner. Okay? So this is a great technique to have in your back pocket as a last resort. If you're just about to lose somebody, hey man, it can't hurt to swing your leg at your training partner's legs. Well, I guess it can hurt physically, but you know what I'm saying. Can't hurt your chances to swing your leg across your training partner's legs and try to catch that Diashi at the last second. You might not always get it, but you have one really good opportunity to hit it before they turn and face you. Okay? So, a couple different situations. Okay? My training partner starts moving away, and I catch foot to foot, dropping him down to a knee or hip. Okay? Next one, I use my knee sweep version instead of foot to foot. So I can dictate when I'm going to do this move instead of my training partner. I don't have to follow foot patterns. I just step knee deep between my training partner's legs. Knee comes through, and it's almost like a mat return. Okay? Like so. All right? That's my favorite ways to do the Diashis. And then again, just remember that even when the hands kind of separate, you still have an opportunity to kick those legs. Chris is about to break free. I'll show you the context of that. Right? Like you can still stumble this guy even if I don't have that full grip. Okay, definitely a good last resort. Okay, we've seen a way to use to use a koichi to bring my training partner's hands to the mat, but we can also use koichi to bring my training partner in a backward direction to knees or hips. Okay? Particularly again in situations where I'm behind my training partner and my training partner has a little bit more upright posture, like they're more backward leaning. Right, a reverse koichi is a nice option. When the training partner is more forward leaning, okay, and I do this koichi, what typically ends up happening is hands go to the floor more than anything. Okay, come back. Okay. As my training partner leans more upright and hips start to come forward, right, one thing that I can do is I can move off to the side and I can sweep my training partner's leg like so. Sometimes he'll go to his hands, sometimes he'll go to his hips, sometimes his knees. It really depends on the situation, okay? But again, it's this action of when my training partner's posture's upright, I maneuver my way out of his way and drop my training partner down towards the floor, okay? It depends on how severely off balance my training partner. So once again, maybe he's fighting hands, maybe he's doing whatever he wants, okay? In similar situation as before, maybe the hands start to separate, but you can still get one hand on your training partner's hip as your training partner tries to move away. I clip that foot, okay? And hands come to the floor. Again, that one wasn't a really great example, because usually I send my training partner backwards instead of forwards. That's kind of what we're looking at. Okay, as you do that, of course, you're not going to do it and just try to stunt on your training partner and like look at them the way that I am. Of course, as you do it, you'll follow your training partner, all right, and get it behind your training partner's shoulders and hips. Okay, but it's a different way to use that foot sweep motion, all right, to kick out your training partner's legs. Okay. Again, a little bit of context. We're fighting. He's trying to move away, etc. I just grab that hip, sweep the leg. Then we work to get into positions, all right, where we can get behind. Another variation of this that works quite well. Not so much a koichi, all right. More like almost, I guess, like a tiny itoshi action, but not quite. You'd probably call it some variation of like a kosoto trick, all right. Is one where I use my forearm over my training partner's hip, okay? And this time I get to keep locked hands. I showed you guys how I can kind of pull my training partner back onto his hands. Or we can also clip my training partner's foot in this position and drop my training partner to a knee. Okay, that's another way. As my training partner's moving away and he's more upright, or if my training partner's a bit more bent over, making contact with that foot like so. All right, as I bar my training partner's hip. Okay, elbow against the hip. I move out of the way. I make a connection with the foot, and I'm ready to work. All right, so let's take a look at an interesting application of something similar to Dayashi. I like to refer to it as a kick out that we can do to my training partner for rear body lock situations. So this one's pretty fun because it's another dynamic one. It typically involves movement on the part of my training partner. Okay, this is not something that I would typically do when my training partner is somewhat stationary. There's other better things to do. So when I get in a rear body lock situation and I feel my training partner managing to peel hands, etc., from these sorts of situations, one of the things I'll do is as my hands separate, I come up to the shoulders. So what my training partner often looks to do, right, in these sorts of situations is cut a hip in and separate hands. Now that stops me from connecting my hands at the hips. Okay, at some point the hands have to separate, especially as that hip wedges in. Okay, but often what my training partner can't stop is reconnecting at the shoulders. Okay, so we move out, I separate, and then there's an opportunity here to just quickly grab your training partner's shoulders. Okay, another thing that's typically happening while your training partner is doing this is they're leaning into you with their shoulders, right? So there's weight moving in a backward direction. So if we kind of watch this kind of happen slowly, my training partner's tilting back. And as this happens, I just step a foot underneath my training partner, kick out my training partner's legs, and just sit him towards the floor. Now from here, we follow suit behind our training partner, ready to take the back however we see fit with hooks, figure four, whatever the case may be. Okay, so once again, I'm in rear body lock situations for my training partner. I start to feel those hands separate, and I just go quickly up to the shoulders. Sometimes you're not going to be able to get it because it's going to be a little bit messy. It's not always, a perfect transition. Maybe sometimes only one hand comes in. Okay, maybe he's able to block one hand and I only get one hand up. That's okay. All I really need is a little lift and connection to my training partner for a second to take some weight off of his heels. Okay, even with that one hand, I can get that kick out to work. Okay, so don't worry about making it perfectly clean. Don't worry about perfectly grabbing the shoulders. Like I said, it's a dynamic thing. He's going to be trying to grab your wrist. All you need is a little lift. Even if I was doing this and my training partner kind of shut me out and I had something super weird like this, my forearms were just underneath, that little lift is enough to kick my training partner out. So don't worry so much. The goal for sure is to grab the shoulders. I think that's the best grip, but you just need that little lift. Okay, so hands go from hips to somewhere around the shoulders. Okay, we're here, he's fighting. And I kick and sit my training partner down from here, ready to kick the back. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at bringing my training partner's hips and knees to the mat through an action of hooking behind my training partner's knees. So my training partner stands up, okay? And I get in these rear body lock positions. And one of the interesting things that I can do, again, especially when my training partner is starting to try to maneuver his hips away, almost like he's sitting in a chair, trying to separate arms, etc. One great way that I can stymie my training partner is to put my foot behind my training partner's hamstrings like so, all right, hooking underneath the knee, and then just kind of pulling my training partner into the space that he's creating by moving his hips away. So as he goes to start to do this, I put that hook in, and I just hop that down to a knee, bringing my training partner down to the mat. Even if he's not actively really trying to pull away, sometimes you can get away with dropping your training partner in this fashion. Now, that's a weaker version of what I'm about to show you now. Still a very good move, right? I think that's very valuable, okay? There's another version of doing this where you hook not the near leg, but the far leg, and the knee penetrates between your training partner's two knees. And how it looks is like so. I take my foot, put it across, and I slide underneath my training partner, lifting and elevating my training partner down to the mat. From here, I recommend a claw grip or a seatbelt switch to recover the back. Okay? So this movement, just change orientation so they can see what's going on. involves not a near hook, but a far hook. And my knee lifts and elevates my training partner. Make a quick switch so I can maintain the back, like so. Okay, so using your feet behind your training partner's hamstrings, always a good thing. Now, be very careful. There is another technique, and I don't really teach it anymore because I believe there's way too much danger associated with it. I'll show you that it exists purely for the purposes of making sure that you understand the danger associated with it. There is a technique where you jump up and put both feet in at the same time and then sit to the mat. I'll do a shitty version of it. Now, that is fine. What I just did there is very safe. Okay? And you could do this version of the move. Okay, this would be a move too. It's kind of similar to what we did before, except for you don't drop to a knee, you sit to your butt. Okay, this is fine because I'm slowly lowering myself to the mat and I'm pulling my training partner into this crab ride situation, right? That's totally cool. Go back up. But the move that's often taught is one in which you jump into that position. Okay, and I'm nervous to even do it just drilling with Chris. Okay, by jumping into that position, the problem is this. The jump inherently adds forward momentum to the situation and makes my training partner want to lean the wrong direction. I ultimately want to bring him this way, and he's going to start heading that way. Now, he might get broken down, but what tends to happen, if anybody's been clipped in the back of the knee before, his 2 feet are going to hit the back of the knees like this as he's moving forward, and he can roll over both ankles like this. I actually did this to somebody years ago. That's why I'm so terrified of it, okay? So if you're going to perform a move like that, I mean, I strongly recommend you don't do it to your drilling partners. Definitely just save that one for competition, okay? But if you dive 2 feet behind the knees, okay, that's the danger. My recommendation is just one leg, slowly sit to the mat, and drag your training partner's hips towards you if you want to do something like that. Be very careful of the idea of just jumping towards your training partner with 2 feet, okay?